I thought I was living the perfect suburban dream until a single DNA test exposed the most shameful secret of my life. And it was in my husband who was the cheater. Let me take you back to where it all began. Married to David for 3 years, living in what I thought was my fairy tale life. We had this gorgeous colonial house in the suburbs with the white picket fence, manicured lawn, and everything you'd see in a magazine. David was a successful investment banker, tall, handsome, always dressed in those crisp suits that made other women turn their heads when we walked into restaurants together. Our love story was like something out of a romance novel. We met at a charity gala where I was working as an event coordinator. I remember seeing him across the room, this confident man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, and thinking he was completely out of my league. But somehow, by the end of the night, he was asking for my number. Our first date lasted 12 hours. We went to dinner, then walked through the city until sunrise, talking about everything and nothing. 6 months later, I moved into his penthouse apartment. A year after that, he proposed on a beach in Santorini with a ring that made my friends gasp when I showed them the photos. The wedding was perfect. 200 guests, flowers everywhere. And David looking at me like I was the only woman in the world. I felt like the luckiest girl alive. After we bought the house, David said he wanted to focus on making it perfect for us. He hired contractors, interior designers, and insisted on getting the best of everything. That's when he decided we needed professional landscaping. The backyard was huge, but completely bare, just grass and a few sad-looking shrubs. David wanted something that would impress his business associates when we hosted dinner parties. That's how Miguel came into our lives. He was 25, about my age, with sun-kissed skin and these warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. His English was accented but perfect, and he had this quiet confidence that was so different from David's corporate assertiveness. Miguel and his small crew transformed our backyard into something magical. Rose gardens, stone pathway, even a small fountain that sparkled in the morning light. David was thrilled with the work, but he was always traveling for business, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. Those long days alone in that big house started to feel suffocating. I'd work from my home office, handling events remotely, but by afternoon, I'd find myself making excuses to go outside when Miguel was there. At first, it was innocent. I'd bring him and his crew cold drinks on hot days, maybe chat for a few minutes about the plants or the weather. Miguel was respectful, always polite, never crossing any lines. But there was something about the way he looked at me. Not like David looked at his trophy wife, but like he actually saw me. When I talked, Miguel listened. When I made a joke, he laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The project was supposed to take 6 weeks, but somehow it stretched to 3 months. Miguel would find new things that needed attention. The irrigation system, seasonal plantings, maintenance that couldn't wait. David didn't mind because the yard looked incredible and Miguel's prices were reasonable. What David didn't know was that I was the one suggesting these additions, any excuse to keep Miguel coming around. I started timing my coffee breaks for when Miguel arrived each morning. I'd watch him work from the kitchen window, admiring the way his muscles moved as he dug or planted. I told myself I was just appreciating good craftsmanship, but deep down I knew I was lying to myself. David's business trips became more frequent, sometimes lasting 2 weeks at a time. He'd call every night, but the conversations felt mechanical. How was my day? What did I have for dinner? When would the landscaping be finished? He never asked how I was feeling, if I was lonely, or if I missed him. It was like I was another item on his daily checklist. Meanwhile, Miguel and I grew closer. He told me about his family back in Honduras, how he was working to bring his younger sister to America for college. I shared stories about my childhood, my dreams of maybe having my own event planning business someday instead of working for other people. These conversations happened while he worked, me sitting on the porch steps, him kneeling in the garden beds. I convinced myself that nothing was wrong. We were just friends. I was being a good hostess, making sure the contractor felt welcome. David would have wanted me to be polite and hospitable, but the truth was, I looked forward to these moments with Miguel more than I looked forward to David coming home from his trips. The attraction was building slowly, like water behind a dam. Every shared laugh, every moment our hands accidentally touched when I handed him a glass of lemonade. Every time he said my name with that soft accent, It all accumulated into something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. 3 months into the landscaping project, David announced he'd be going to Singapore for a month-long deal negotiation. He was excited about the promotion this would bring, the bonus, how it would set us up for the future. All I could think about was 30 days alone, with Miguel working in my backyard every single day. That's when I knew I was in trouble. The morning David left for Singapore, I stood at the bedroom window watching Miguel's truck pull into our driveway. My heart was racing, and I tried to convince myself it was just because I'd had too much coffee, but I knew better. For 3 months, I'd been playing with fire, and now I was about to get burned. That first week, something shifted between Miguel and me. Without David's presence, even the invisible threat of him coming home unexpectedly, the air felt different. Our conversations lasted longer. Miguel started taking his lunch break on our patio instead of in his truck. I found myself changing clothes 3 times before going outside, choosing outfits that were casual but flattering. On Thursday of that week, it rained. A sudden downpour that sent Miguel running to our back door, soaked through his work shirt. I invited him in without thinking, handed him a towel, offered him coffee while his clothes dried. We sat at my kitchen island talking and laughing, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not David's wife, not the perfect hostess, just me. Miguel told me about a girl back home who broke his heart, how he came to America partly to escape that pain. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, how sometimes I felt like I was living someone else's life, how David's world of dinner parties and country club events made me feel like an actress playing a role. "You seem sad sometimes," Miguel said quietly, his dark eyes searching my face. "Even when you smile." No one had noticed that before. Not David, not my friends, not even my mother. But this man who'd known me for 3 months could see right through the facade I'd perfected over years. That's when I should have pulled back. Instead, I leaned forward. The kiss was soft, hesitant, like we were both testing the waters of something we couldn't take back. When we broke apart, Miguel looked stricken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should go." But I didn't let him go. I kissed him again, and this time there was nothing hesitant about it. What happened next changed everything. We made love on my kitchen counter, desperate and passionate in a way I'd never experienced with David. Afterward, as we held each other, I felt guilty and alive and terrified all at once. Miguel left that day, promising it wouldn't happen again. We both knew it was a lie. For the next 3 weeks, we carried on an affair that consumed me completely. Every morning, I'd wake up counting the hours until Miguel arrived. We'd work together in the garden, finding excuses to touch, his hand covering mine as he showed me how to prune roses. My body pressed against his back as he taught me to use the hedge trimmers. The afternoons were ours. We made love in every room of that house, on the living room floor, in the guest bedroom. Once even in the shower. David and I had renovated just months before. Miguel was tender and passionate, everything David wasn't. He made me feel beautiful, desired, like I was the most important thing in his world. But it wasn't just physical. Miguel listened to me in ways David never had. When I talked about wanting my own business, he didn't dismiss it as a hobby. When I shared my fears about being alone so much, he didn't offer solutions. He just held me. We'd lie in bed talking for hours, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin. And I'd think this is what love is supposed to feel like. The guilt was eating me alive, but I couldn't stop. I'd never felt so connected to another person. Miguel saw parts of me I'd forgotten existed. With David, I was the perfect wife. Polished, agreeable, decorative. With Miguel, I could be messy and real and passionate. 2 days before David was supposed to return, Miguel told me he was in love with me. We were in my bedroom, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and the words hung in the air between us like a confession and a question all at once. "I love you too," I whispered back, and meant it completely. That night, alone in the house, reality crashed over me like a wave. What had I done? I was married. David trusted me. He was working halfway around the world to build our future, while I was destroying it in our own home. The beautiful backyard Miguel had created suddenly felt like a crime scene, every plant and stone a reminder of my betrayal. I called Miguel that night, crying, telling him we had to end it. He was quiet for a long time, then said he understood. "But I won't regret loving you," he said. even if it breaks my heart. David came home the next evening with gifts and stories about Singapore, completely oblivious to the fact that everything had changed. I played the part of the loving wife, asked about his trip, made his favorite dinner, but inside I was dying. Every kiss felt like a lie. Every "I missed you" tasted like poison in my mouth. Miguel finished the landscaping that week. I stayed inside while he worked, watching from behind curtains like a coward. When he knocked on the door for the final payment, I had David handle it. Couldn't bear to look at Miguel's face, to see the hurt I'd caused. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could bury the guilt, pretend it never happened, go back to being David's perfect wife. For 2 months, I almost succeeded. But then, I missed my period. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines that felt like a death sentence. I sat on my bathroom floor, staring at that little plastic stick, knowing my entire life was about to implode. Because I'd been tracking my cycle for months, trying to get pregnant with David, the timing was impossible to ignore. This baby could only be Miguel's. The next few weeks passed in a haze of morning sickness and pure terror. I was pregnant, and there was no question about who the father was. David and I had been trying to conceive for over a year without success, and then after 1 month with Miguel, I was carrying another man's child. I considered my options in those dark, early morning hours when David was still asleep beside me. I could terminate the pregnancy. David would never have to know about my affair, and we could go back to trying for our own baby. But every time I thought about it, I felt sick with guilt. This innocent child didn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. I could confess everything to David, beg for his forgiveness, and hope somehow we could work through it together. But I knew David well enough to know that his pride would never recover from this betrayal. He'd divorce me, and I'd lose everything: the house, the life we'd built, probably half our friends who would side with him, or I could lie. I could pretend this baby was David's miracle, the child we'd been praying for. The timing wasn't perfect, but it wasn't impossible either. David would be so excited about becoming a father that he might not question it too closely. The lying one. Not proud of it, but desperation makes cowards of us all. When I told David I was pregnant, his reaction was everything I'd expected and dreaded. He swept me up in his arms, spinning me around our kitchen, while tears of joy streamed down his face. He called his parents immediately, then mine, announcing our miracle baby to everyone who'd listen. His happiness was so pure, so genuine, that it made my deception feel even more monstrous. David threw himself into pregnancy preparations with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He researched cribs and car seats, interviewed pediatricians, and started planning a nursery that would rival something out of a design magazine. He'd talk to my belly every night, telling our baby about all the adventures they'd have together. Each moment was beautiful and heartbreaking, knowing I was stealing these dreams from him. The pregnancy progressed normally. David came to every appointment, held my hand during ultrasounds, and proudly showed sonogram pictures to anyone who'd look. I fell in love with the baby growing inside me, but the guilt was a constant companion. Every kick, every flutter, reminded me of the lie I was living. Isabella was born on a rainy Thursday in March, after 12 hours of labor that David coached me through with endless patience and encouragement. When the doctor placed her in my arms, she was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the most beautiful, dark eyes I'd ever seen. David cried when he held her, whispering promises about being the best father in the world. For the first few months, I convinced myself everything would be fine. Isabella looked like a generic newborn, wrinkled and red and impossible to really identify features on. David was completely smitten, taking hundreds of photos and sending them to everyone in his contact list. He was an amazing father, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his off-key voice that somehow always made Isabella smile. But as Isabella grew, the resemblance to Miguel became undeniable. Her dark hair stayed dark instead of lightning like mine had as a child. Her skin had an olive tone that neither David nor I possessed. Most tellingly, she had Miguel's eyes, warm brown with those distinctive long lashes that had first caught my attention. At first, people were polite about it. "She's going to be exotic looking," my mother said tactfully. "This must be some recessive genes showing up." David's mother made similar comments, always phrased as compliments about Isabella's unique beauty. But I caught the glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. David never said anything directly, but I noticed him studying Isabella sometimes with a puzzled expression. He'd compare baby photos of himself to her features, trying to find similarities that just weren't there. When people commented on how different she looked from both of us, he'd laugh it off, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. The breaking point came when Isabella was 8 months old. We were at David's company picnic, and his colleague Marcus was playing with Isabella, making her laugh with silly faces. "She's gorgeous," Marcus said to David. "Doesn't look like either of you, but she's absolutely beautiful. Probably got some mailman genes in there, right?" He laughed at his own joke, but David's face went white. That night, after Isabella was asleep, David confronted me for the first time. "People keep commenting on how she doesn't look like us," he said quietly. "I've been trying to ignore it, but is there something you need to tell me?" I could have confessed then, should have confessed. Instead, I doubled down on the lie. "She's a baby, David. She's going to change as she grows. And genetics are complicated. Maybe she got some traits from great-grandparents or something." I could see him grasping at my explanation like a lifeline. But doubt had been planted, and it grew stronger every day. 2 weeks later, David came home with a DNA testing kit. He set it on the kitchen counter without saying a word, just looked at me with eyes full of pain and hope and terror. "I need to know," he whispered. "I love her completely, but I need to know the truth." I stared at that little box, knowing it contained the power to destroy everything. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, reading the instructions that seemed impossibly simple for something that would change our lives forever. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "Let's find out." But I already knew what the results would show, and I knew there was no coming back from this moment. The lie I'd been living for almost a year was about to crumble, and I had no idea how I'd survive the aftermath. The 2 weeks we waited for the DNA results were the longest of my life. Every day felt like walking on broken glass, trying to maintain normal conversations while my entire world teetered on the edge of collapse. David was quieter than usual, going through the motions of work and fatherhood. But I could see the anxiety eating away at him. He'd stare at Isabella during her bath time, or while she played, and I knew he was memorizing her face in case everything changed. I considered confessing during those 14 days. Maybe if I told him the truth before the results came back, showed him how much I regretted my choices, he might find a way to forgive me. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, the words died in my throat. I was a coward, plain and simple, hoping against hope that somehow the test would be wrong or inconclusive. The results were scheduled to arrive on a Wednesday. David had taken the day off work, saying he didn't want to be distracted at the office. I'd barely slept the night before, lying awake listening to him toss and turn beside me, both of us pretending to sleep while our marriage hung in the balance. The email arrived at 2:17 p.m. David was feeding Isabella in her high chair, making airplane noises as he guided the spoon toward her mouth. She was giggling and clapping her hands, completely oblivious to the storm about to break over our family. I was washing dishes at the sink when his phone chimed with the notification. "It's here," he said quietly. I turned off the water, dried my hands on a towel that suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and walked over to where he sat. Isabella reached for me, babbling "Mama," in that sweet voice that always made my heart melt. I picked her up and held her close, breathing in her baby smell. Knowing this might be one of the last peaceful moments we'd have as a family, David opened the email with hands that trembled slightly. I watched his face as he read, seeing the exact moment when the words registered. His expression crumbled like a building collapsing in slow motion. Confusion first, then recognition, then a pain so deep it was almost physical to witness. 0% probability of paternity, he read aloud, his voice hollow. He looked at the screen for a long moment, then at Isabella in my arms, then finally at me. 0%. That means ... I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Isabella sensed the tension and started to fuss, but I barely heard her cries over the thundering of my own heartbeat. "Say something," David whispered. "Please, just ... Explain this to me. There has to be some mistake, some explanation." I wanted to lie again, to find some way to make this go away, but the evidence was right there in black and white. Instead, I started to cry, ugly, wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of my soul. "David, I I couldn't form the words. How do you tell someone you love that you've been lying to them for almost a year? Do you admit that their precious daughter, the child they've loved and cared for since birth, isn't biologically theirs? Who? He asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. Who is her father? The question hung in the air between us like a blade. Isabella had stopped crying and was looking back and forth between us with those wide brown eyes, Miguel's eyes, as if she could sense that something fundamental was changing. The landscaper I finally managed to choke out. Miguel, it was. It was while you were in Singapore. David stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then he stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen window that overlooked our backyard, Miguel's garden, Miguel's fountain, Miguel's roses that were blooming in brilliant red clusters. His shoulders started to shake, and then he was crying too, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from his core. In our house, he said without turning around. While I was working to build our future, you were. In our house? I set Isabella in her bouncy seat and walked toward him, desperate to comfort him somehow, but he stepped away from me like my touch would burn him. Don't, he said. Don't touch me, I can't. I need you to not touch me right now. We stood there in our beautiful kitchen, the one we'd renovated together with dreams of family dinners and birthday parties, and I watched my husband's heart break in real time. Every plan we'd made, every future we'd imagined, every moment of joy we shared over Isabella's birth, all of it was now tainted with the truth of my betrayal. Do you love him? David asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I'd expected anger, accusations, demands for details about the affair. But David wanted to know about love, and somehow that made it so much worse. I thought I did, I said honestly. During those weeks, I thought I loved him, but I love you too, David. I never stopped loving you. He laughed bitterly. You love me? You let me hold her in the delivery room, thinking she was mine? You let me call my parents and tell them they had a granddaughter? You let me fall in love with her completely, knowing she wasn't mine. Each word was like a physical blow. I sank into one of our kitchen chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd done. It was unjust adultery. It was a year-long deception that had stolen his right to know the truth about his own life. She is yours, I said desperately. Biology doesn't make a father, David. You're the only father she's ever known. You're the one who got up with her at night, who taught her to smile, who... Stop. He turned to face me, and I barely recognized the man I'd married. His eyes were red with tears, but there was something harder there too. A coldness I'd never seen before. Just stop talking. I need time to think. He picked up Isabella from her seat, held her close for a moment, kissed the top of her head, then handed her to me. I'm going to a hotel tonight. I can't be here right now. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the daughter who destroyed everything and the truth that finally mercifully set us all free. David didn't come home that night, or the next. He texted once to ask if Isabella needed anything, but his messages were cold and formal, like I was a stranger instead of his wife. I spent those days in a haze of regret and fear, caring for Isabella while trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of my life. On Friday, David returned to collect some clothes. He moved through our house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. Isabella reached for him when she saw him, babbling data with that bright smile that usually made him melt. For a moment, his resolve wavered, and he picked her up, holding her close. I saw tears in his eyes as he kissed her forehead and whispered something I couldn't hear. We need to talk about what happens next, he said when he put her down. I'd been dreading this conversation, but I knew it was inevitable. What do you want to do? I want a divorce, he said simply. I can't stay married to someone who could lie to me like this. But Isabella... She's innocent in all of this. I've been her father since the day she was born. DNA or no DNA. I want to stay in her life if you'll let me. His generosity in the face of my betrayal made me feel even worse. A lesser man might have walked away completely, might have demanded that I deal with the consequences of my actions alone. But David loved Isabella genuinely, unconditionally, and despite everything I'd done, he was still thinking about her welfare first. Of course, I managed to say she adores you. You're her father in every way that matters. David nodded, but I could see the pain in his expression. I'll need some time to figure out how to do this. Joint custody, maybe. Or ... I don't know. I've never had to navigate loving a child who isn't biologically mine after finding out this way. The divorce proceedings were remarkably civil, considering the circumstances. David could have fought for everything, could have made my life hell in court, but he didn't. He took his share of our assets and moved into a condo across town. We worked out a custody arrangement where Isabella would spend weekends with him, and one evening during the week, insisted on continuing to pay child support, even though legally he had no obligation to do so. She didn't choose this situation, he told his lawyer, when the man questioned the financial arrangement. I'm not going to punish her for her mother's mistakes. But while David was handling our separation with grace, I knew I had other business to attend to. Miguel deserved to know he had a daughter, even if I wasn't sure what I wanted from that conversation. I found his number in my old phone records and called him on a Thursday evening after Isabella was asleep. He sounded surprised to hear from me. It had been over a year since we'd spoken. I need to see you, I said. There's something important I need to tell you. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would have memories to complicate an already difficult conversation. Miguel looked exactly as I remembered. Maybe a little older, a few more lines around those brown eyes, but still handsome in that quiet way that had first attracted me. You look good, he said when I sat down across from him. Marriage suits you. I'm getting divorced, I said without preamble. There was no point in small talk. His expression shifted to concern. I'm sorry to hear that. Is everything okay? I pulled out my phone and showed him a recent photo of Isabella, one of her sitting in David's lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. She's yours, I said simply. Miguel stared at the photo for a long time, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, wonder. She has my eyes, he whispered. Yes, she does. He looked up at me, and I could see 1,000 questions in his expression. Why didn't you tell me? How long have you known? I suspected from the beginning, but I hoped. I wanted her to be David's. We just did a DNA test to confirm it. Took a shaky breath. Her name is Isabella. She's 10 months old. She's walking and starting to say words. She loves music and hates carrots and has the most infectious laugh you've ever heard. Miguel was quiet for several minutes, studying the photo like he was memorizing every detail of his daughter's face. What do you want from me? He finally asked. It was a fair question, and one I wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know, I admitted. I thought you deserved to know the truth. What you do with that information is up to you. Does she know about me? She's 10 months old, Miguel. She doesn't understand any of this. David has been her father since birth, and he's planning to stay in her life. But if you want to be part of it too, I want to meet her, he said immediately. Not to complicate things, but ... She's my daughter. I've spent the last year not knowing I had a child. Over the following weeks, we worked out a careful arrangement. Miguel would visit once a week, always when David wasn't there, to avoid confusion for Isabella and awkwardness for everyone involved. Those first meetings were tentative and emotional. Isabella was shy with this stranger at first, but Miguel was patient and gentle, letting her warm up to him at her own pace. It was surreal watching Miguel interact with his daughter. He had a natural way with her that reminded me why I'd been attracted to him in the first place. He'd sing to her in Spanish, teach her the names of flowers, make her giggle with silly faces. Isabella seemed drawn to him too, reaching for him more easily with each visit. But the situation was complicated and painful for everyone involved. David struggled with seeing Miguel's car in our driveway. Miguel wrestled with guilt over his role in destroying my marriage. I was caught in the middle, trying to navigate relationships with both men while dealing with my own shame and regret. The confrontations I'd expected, screaming matches, dramatic scenes, never materialized. Instead, there was just this quiet sadness that permeated everything. 3 adults trying to do right by one innocent child while dealing with the fallout from choices that couldn't be undone. 2 years have passed since that DNA test results email changed everything, and I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to live with the consequences of your choices. The woman who made that decision to betray her husband feels like a stranger to me now, but I can't pretend she wasn't me. I can't undo what I did or take back the pain I caused. David and I finalized our divorce 8 months after Isabella's paternity was revealed. It was one of the hardest days of my life, signing papers that officially ended what I'd thought was my forever love story. But it was also a relief in some ways. The lying was over. The pretending was done. For better or worse, everyone finally knew the truth. David kept his promise about staying in Isabella's life. He picks her up every Friday evening and brings her back Sunday nights, plus one evening during the week for dinner. Watching them together breaks my heart in the most beautiful way. He loves her completely, and she adores him. To Isabella, he's simply daddy, and that will never change, regardless of biology. Miguel has also become a consistent presence in our lives. What started as awkward weekly visits has evolved into something more natural. He comes by twice a week now, and Isabella lights up when she sees him. She calls him Miggy, unable to pronounce his full name yet, and he's teaching her Spanish words alongside her English ones. He brings her books about gardens and flowers, takes her to the park, and shows her pictures of his family in Honduras. Her family too, I suppose. The most surprising development has been how David and Miguel have learned to coexist in Isabella's life. They're not friends. I don't think they'll ever be friends. But they're civil and respectful when their paths cross during pick-up and drop-off times. They both love her, and they found a way to put her needs ahead of their own complicated feelings about the situation. As for me, I'm learning to live with being the villain in my own story. I destroyed a marriage, hurt a man who loved me unconditionally, and created a complex situation that my daughter will have to navigate her entire life. There's no redemption arc that makes it okay. No lesson learned that justifies the pain I caused. But I'm also learning that people are more complex than the worst things they do. I made terrible choices, but I'm not only those choices. I'm also the mother who rocks Isabella to sleep every night, who cheers when she takes wobbly steps across the living room, who worries about her future happiness, above all else. I've started therapy, something I probably should have done years ago, instead of looking for validation in another man's arms. My therapist doesn't excuse my behavior, but she's helping me understand it. The loneliness in my marriage, the feeling of being invisible, the way I confused attention with love, none of it justifies adultery. But it explains how I got so lost. I sold the house where everything happened. Living surrounded by Miguel's garden and the ghosts of my deception was too painful for all of us. Isabella and I moved into a smaller place across town, something I could afford on my own after starting my event planning business. It's not the suburban dream I thought I wanted, but it's honest, and that matters more than I realized before. The hardest part isn't the practical stuff: custody schedules, financial arrangements, co-parenting logistics. The hardest part is the knowledge that I single-handedly destroyed something beautiful. David and I could have had a good marriage if I'd been brave enough to address our problems instead of running from them. Isabella could have grown up in an intact family if I'd made different choices. But dwelling on what-ifs is a luxury I can't afford anymore. Isabella is 3 years old now, happy and healthy, and surrounded by people who love her. She has 2 fathers who would do anything for her, a mother who's learning to be better than she was, and a future full of possibilities. That has to be enough. Sometimes people ask if I regret the affair, and the answer is complicated. I regret the lying, the deception, the pain I caused. I regret not having the courage to address my marriage problems directly. I regret that Isabella will grow up knowing her parents couldn't make it work. But I can't regret Isabella herself. She's the most beautiful thing that came out of the worst decision I ever made. She has David's thoughtfulness, Miguel's gentle nature. And hopefully someday she'll be smarter than her mother about matters of the heart. Miguel recently told me he's dating someone, a teacher he met at his sister's graduation party. I was surprised by how happy I felt for him. What we had was never really love, just 2 lonely people finding comfort in each other. He deserves someone who can love him openly, without secrets or shame. David is dating too, a colleague from his firm who seems kind and stable and nothing like me. Part of me will always love him, but I want him to find the happiness he deserves with someone who won't break his trust. As for me, I'm not looking for love right now. I'm focusing on being the best mother I can be, building my business, and learning to like the woman I see in the mirror. Maybe someday I'll be ready for another relationship, but it will be built on honesty.